This is the story that gets told as the beginning of the Zen tradition. The beginning. The story is that the Buddha went out before an assembly of monks, and this was the thing that happened all the time. The Buddha, people would gather around just to hear if he was going to say something wise, and they would just hang out and wait. And in this specific day, the Buddha went before this gathering, and he stood up there, and they were all expecting some big, exciting, wise teaching. And the Buddha pulled out a beautiful flower and held it and twirled it before the audience. And that's it. He twirled the flower. So many of the monks are like, what's going on here? Why is he twirling a flower? But one monk named Mahakasyapa, he just saw the twirling and he smiled. He saw the twirling and he smiled. And that one, Mahakasyapa, is credited as the first leader of the Zen tradition, the first patriarch. I don't really like the word patriarch, but he's credited as the first patriarch of the Zen tradition. So he was the student of the Buddha, and his student, and his student, and his student, and that's where the Zen tradition comes from. But what happens in this story, right? Why does the Buddha hold up a flower? Why does Mahakasyapa smile? Why is that meaningful? That's what we're going to talk about today. So the teaching is said to be beyond words. It's very hard for us to grasp that sometimes. Words, labels, concepts, these are very fundamental to the way we think. They're everything sometimes. So the Buddha stood before his students and he was silent and he held out a flower, and only one student understood and smiled. And the Buddha in this incident was asking everyone to put down their expectations and words and just be present. That's what he was expecting them to do. So what does that mean? That means when you see a flower, you're not thinking about, oh, why isn't this teaching something different? Mahakasyapa was just seeing a pretty flower. So he smiled. Sometimes we use mirror analogies in Buddhism. So we say, like, a clean mirror just reflects what's in front of it, and a dirty mirror does not give a clear reflection. So if we have a lot of baggage and a lot of expectations, a lot of emotional attachment, then we're like a dirty mirror. And if we're able to get through a lot of those impurities, a lot of our delusion and our baggage, then we have more of a clean mirror. And Mahakasyapa, his being is like a clear, clean mirror. So the Buddha holds up a pretty flower, and Mahakasyapa just sees a pretty flower. And so he smiles. It's a pretty flower. He's not being held by his expectations. He's not being held by his baggage. He's not thinking about teachings he's had in the past or thinking about the next teaching after this. He's just seeing a pretty flower in front of him. That's it. So what does this mean to us? I'm glad you asked. This means we can take this into our lives. We can try to take this lesson into our lives. How can we do that? When we bring all our baggage into a situation, we sometimes don't serve ourselves very well. So, for example, if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're in a bad mood all day, you're bringing that baggage from that one incident, and it's affecting everything that happens after. And we go through that all the time. And sometimes we even have, like, trauma, something bad that happened to us a long time ago, and we're carrying that into future situations. And we're not being a clean mirror. And this is, of course, easier said than done, putting down this baggage and being fully present. But once we realize that we are having these habits, we can start to think about that. We can start to think of, am I making these assumptions about my job because of a previous job? Or am I afraid in this relationship because of a previous relationship? What am I carrying into this situation? That is something we can ask ourselves all the time, because we're always carrying a lot. And what we want to do, if we can, is learn how to just see a pretty flower. That's not to say we shouldn't learn from what's happened to us in the past. Of course we should. We need to learn from our past, but we also want to not live there. We want to learn from our past and also not live there. And I think that's a very important lesson. So, that's the story I wanted to talk about today. That's called the Buddha's Flower Sermon. Sometimes it's called the Buddha Twirls a Flower. Sometimes it's called the Buddha and Mahakasyapa, but that's supposed to be the foundation of the Zen tradition. The Buddha holds out a flower, and one student just sees a flower and only responds to the flower without bringing his personal baggage into it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk. Have a good day.